thinking about our identity, our roots in Africa, Haiti, or Cuba. We is a Bahamian, but Columbus got us all messed up. And we don't know whether we're black, Sambo, Mulatto, or even truly white. Pause. Think about it with intentional thought and consider where we go from here. Stay tuned and listen to Chris Ömo-Shango enlighten us on our roots on the effect of gaslighting. We'll be right back after these messages.
Something to think about with Dale Happy Knowles.
Welcome back to Something to Think About with Dale Happy Knowles. What we think, we become. What we radiate, we attract. And what we imagine, we surely can achieve. Let's change the narrative 2 for 2. So this evening we have a special guest, one who
These are the top results.
A stranger to any of us, but he has a wealth of knowledge and can lead us through a walk down history lane and helping us to identify identity. And so we welcome to the show Mr. Chris Ömo-Shango Davis.
Thank you. Thank you.
There on the screen.
Great to be here. Great to be here.
Yes. We love to have you here. We're all about addressing the novice and the novel and the things that are different. And surely you fit into that bracket, and what you are doing as a citizen of this land and enlightening us and educating us in ways that many of us have a perspective that we never even were taught to consider to look down that road in the way we look at our history and our past. It's sometimes matched history and past, but most of the time it's all different because of the way people write it isn't necessarily what it really was.
Right. Oh yeah, that's for sure.
Yes. So, Chris, if I can call you that, you're a researcher. You did some history interpretations, and then you're a storyteller. You're an author and a project manager. You want to tell us a little bit about those things before we dive into some of the other things?
Yeah, man. Well, my day job, I actually work for the Antiquities, Monuments, and Museum Corporation. So many people know me from interacting with me at the Pompey Museum right there downtown. For those that don't know, that's the first building when you get on Bay Street. Well, the second building technically on your left, the big pink pretty building with the lovely artistry on it, and that's where I work. And I've been working there going on 8 years now. But even prior to my job getting there, and a part of the reason I got the job there was because I've always been kind of a freelance researcher. And me getting into this in-depth historical research was something that kind of happened organically for me. All my adult life, I was always questioning and inquisitive, and started to realize certain things about myself, and then about my family, and then about my community, then about the country, and then about all of us who call ourselves, quote unquote, Black, and so it's something, I wouldn't even call it my passion. I would say it's become an obsession almost, and I spend a lot of my waking time doing research, reading up on stuff, and even just sitting down to myself and pondering all of the things that you so gracefully put forth in the introduction, right? And I'm also a project manager. I did that with Lignum Institute. And I actually have found ways to incorporate project management with my historical research in general, and I'm also a storyteller, and I recently completed my first book. It's in the process of editing and all of these different things now, and I'm also working on my second book, some of which I will get into as we continue our talk about our origins and things of that nature. And so it's just something I've always been passionate about. My family is also very history-centered as well. And it's not only been an academic and a professional journey for me, it's also even been a spiritual journey for me. And so Yeah, it's been a very, very short journey in comparison to most others, but I spend a lot of time researching now, and I actually thoroughly enjoy it as well.
Well, we could see that in your work. It comes
Thank
up that you are having fun, and don't mind the time that you have been in it. The content and the quality of content, from what I've been exposed to, has a lot of merit to and a lot of value. So hats off to you.
Thank
I
you,
would say
sir.
tip my hair, but that's one of those things that I don't have the blessings of you to have hair on the face and hair on the hair and all of those things. So those things disappeared sometime past.
Don't worry,
But,
man. You still look young. You're looking
yeah.
young, so you're looking good. You're straight.
Well, I try to. Some people try to keep me young too. So when we look at this whole thing now, this show is sponsored by Dom Dev Enterprises and Paja Investment Limited, and we have friends who like to join us and and so we have Islandese Realty, T1 Development, and Sammy's Chicken, who all be a part of our family of sorts. And so when we look at what we're trying to do here now and what we want to talk about tonight, in terms of particularly the our identity. I always say to people, based on my limited knowledge and exposure to the Bible and the like, that we all came from the Africa area. When you say came from, but you could define that as coming from or of the Africa or whatever words you put down, because there's different meanings to that. But my understanding is all colors come from black.
Yeah.
Only light, all colors come from white light. It's broken out from that, but everything else, it's black is a composite of all. So when we say these things, really and truly, even though we have the separation of powers from the persons with darker hues and those with lily whites, they all came from the same, right? That's the way I look at it. But there's power in the name, and so I can't go beyond this step here without you having to explain to us how or where or whichever you got the name Omo-Shango.
Oh, well, Omo-Shango, very simply put, it just means son of Shango. Shango is one of the most popular kings, deities, depending on how you look at it, that comes out of West Africa. You see him even in northern Ghana, where he just came from, actually, well, not specifically the north, but I've met people from there. But it's more closely linked to the Yoruba people from present day southern Nigeria, southwestern Nigeria, western Nigeria. And as a matter of fact, among the Yoruba people, or Yoruba, some people know it as Yoruba, but I think the proper way is Yoruba. Those are actually one of the largest groups of Africans that came directly to the Bahamas, not only in the transatlantic slave trade, but even after the slave trade was abolished and were then settled here in the Bahamas. To put it into context, when our population was somewhere around 20 to 25,000 people, on one day, over 1,000 formerly enslaved or would-be enslaved Africans landed here in New Providence, and most of whom were from the Yoruba people. You understand? Both ships actually came directly from Lagos, which is a kind of unofficial capital of the Yoruba people, even to this day. And for those of you who like the new trend in Afrobeats, the vast majority of those Nigerian Afrobeats artists come from Lagos as well. And so Shango represents justice. You have something called syncretism, whereas in many of the African faiths, they actually believe that all of these different religions are just different manifestations at different times of the same energies, the same deities. And so Shango is often associated with Elijah because he's also responsible for fire, justice, lightning, thunderstorms. He is known for having a very deep voice, known for being athletic, but there are certain stereotypes, and he is often associated with Saint Barbara. And if you know the story of Saint Barbara, she was unfortunate to have a very cruel father, and her father, somewhere along the lines, tried to essentially sell her into sexual slavery. And before the deal could be done, as he walked outside, he was struck by lightning. And according to the story, that was because she was protected. And that is also why Shango, being one of the popular African deities who also deals with the element of lightning and electricity, Tony McKay actually pays homage to him all the time. And if you had a his most popular song, the Obia Man.
Right.
In the beginning, he says, I came down on a lightning bolt,
Bolt.
9 months in my mama's belly. When I was born, the midwife scream and shout, I had fire and brimstone coming out of my mouth. But of course, it's all symbolic from his point of view. But it all talks about this West African deity known as Shango. And when I've done my travels, when I've been to certain places, a lot of the people that practice or are familiar with Shango, they often associate me with him. And it's something I'm grateful for. And I just adopted the name essentially as the son of Shango, right?
Yeah, well, I wish we should have kept a picture of Shango who we saw on, because then people could have seen why they comparing you to him, because
right.
You know, there are some, based on the pictorials, there are some resemblances in the like. And who knows, I don't know, maybe they crown you or
no, man, ain't a crown. As a matter of fact, in the world of Yoruba religious philosophy or spirituality or Yoruba culture, as you would put it, Shango is actually considered, for lack of a use of a better term, the patron saint of Trinidad. And, you know, in Trinidad, they have a religion called Shango Baptist, which is essentially an infusion of what I just spoke about with Christianity, you know, and it existed here in the Bahamas too. And it's obviously because we still have things like Asu, which is directly derived from the Yoruba people. And we even do things the same way that they do it still to this day in Nigeria, where in my experience, I find that when men control the Asu, is not as successful as when women tend to do it. And you usually realize that women are typically the ones to do Asu draws. And that's a culture that comes directly from the Yoruba people. And it's not just in the Bahamas. You can see the interconnectedness with a place like Jamaica and words that we even adopted via Jamaica. Things like everything Irie. Irie actually comes from the Yoruba word Ire, which means blessing. You know, so when you say everything Irie, you mean, yeah, man, I feel blessed. You know, I feel good. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, folks out there, welcome also to something to think about with Dale Happy Knowles. You're quite welcome to add your comments and your questions online, whether on YouTube or Facebook, however you're watching. Be sure to tell us what part of the world you're watching from. It brings some character to the show and also give us context as to maybe the basis behind some of your questions. And like, Omo-Shango is going to take us down a walk today where many of us have not been before, right? At least we're going to try to push him to go to that point and so forward. And to get it kicked off, we have, now you have to pronounce this last name, Chris, on this, because I know you talked about Alex in another video some time ago, and Alex names and the rest. But he says, fire, fire, fire. Greetings from
Pokesu. Oh yeah. Now let's see if I could get right into it there, you know. And the last show I did, another show, I actually mentioned Alice Kofi. And for those that don't know, Alice Kofi is one of my close contacts. I consider him a brother now. The place is known as Princess Town, but we're trying to change it back to Pokesu. Even though, of course, there are many African princesses that live in this town, many of who I met, you know, all the girls, all the school kids and all that. You know, it's just a beautiful place. But what's so interesting about Pokesu, and my brother Alex here, Alex is actually an oral historian, about the same age as me. He's from Pokesu. And much of the information that I got on Jian Kwao, who we know as Junkanoo, who is the namesake of our most precious intrinsic value here in the Bahamas, known as Junkanoo. You know, Alex is a brother of mine. He's an oral historian. And I hope that by the end of this, it will galvanize Bahamians, Jamaicans, people from Belize, Guyanese, Surinamese, all of these people that are actually connected to Junkanoo and Pokesu to actually go and visit, you know, because they're in the process of building a very strong heritage tourism product over there. And as a matter of fact, the people are already built for it. You know, they're extremely friendly. And I felt right at home, feel like I was, you know, in Kid Island or something like that when I went there, you know, and it was wonderful. But most importantly, this is where the man that we know as Junkanoo was from. And when I discuss our roots, I think culturally, when I explain who this man Jian Kwao was, Junkanoo was, it will give us a better understanding of who we are, particularly as it pertains to Junkanoo, right? But essentially, Pocasoo, where Alice Kofi is from, is where Junkanoo was the chief. Okay. And he was not just a chief, he was a warrior, a general, a merchant. And the more I study about Pocasoo, the Ahanta people, which is the group that Junkanoo is from, now the Ahanta numbered tens of millions of people 200 years ago. And because of their fight, their almost constant fight against the transatlantic slave trade and colonization, their numbers have dwindled to much far below 4 million today. However, they have a very, very, very vibrant culture over there in Western Ghana. And Jan Kwa was essentially this warrior who represented the vanguard, not just for the Ahanta people, but the Nzima people, the Ga people, the Wassa people, even a few Ewe people now that we're discovering were all involved in his army. And his army was used to unequivocally fight against the transatlantic slave trade. And of course, for those who've been following my research thus far, I just returned from Ghana last week, Monday, where along with our research, my wife Tamara, with the help of Alice Kofi, who is watching right now, we actually carried out an outreach initiative. It was very small to begin with, but we feel that it will grow and grow in tandem with us building this heritage tourism product, because in a nutshell, the Ahanta people, Gian Kwao is another king, King Bontu II, and why we named our parade after this man, why his name survived. And we have so many African kings and queens. Why was it his name that was attached to this? And this man, as I said, was an absolutely incredible historical figure. And him, along with all of the Ahanta people and the Nzima people, actually, they represent a history in Africa that we can be very proud of. And then you also see how both the British and the Dutch kind of appropriated this story and the story behind the man of who Junkanoo was. And then it just became this nice celebration. You even have reports of people saying that we were actually doing it to mimic our slave masters. When you realize who Gian Kwa was, you realize that it was not really a mimicry, but these were actually reenactments of battles and feats that Gian Kwa had accomplished against the British and the Dutch. And he held out in the fort that's right there in Pocasoo, known as Gross Friedrichsburg. He held out there for over 8 years. Some will tell you over 20 years, depending on how you look at the complex politics in the area, right? But I'll stop right there because I want to get into more of it a little later, right?
Yeah. Well, shout outs to Holly down there presently in Barbados. Holly is an art icon in this region. And Leslie, who was on the screen just now, is one of our film gurus. And, you know, I'm sure you would be aware of those. Both of them are very esteemed persons. And we thank you for tuning in with us. And then there's Kay Francis, of all means. Now, one of the things I touched on in the scripting for the show, the notice of invite, was I mentioned Africa, Haiti, and Cuba, and the idea of gaslighting. But it wasn't meant to just be Africa, Haiti, and Cuba, because I have a view that we're all interconnected somehow. But Haiti and Cuba in particular had major revolutions in my mind that had a major impact on everybody else around it. And obviously Africa was, excuse me, where everything started out, and everything went blossom from there. So this idea about whether they are gaslighting us, right, or the effect of gaslighting, and the like. Madam Producer, if you want to put up the script for gaslighting, so more visitors, guests and audience could understand what Merriam-Webster defines it as. But basically, it's an idea of manipulating people so that they could think something different than what was. If I could summarize that in its form, we could leave that there for a second. So, Chris, from your perspective and your experience in all of your research so far, of all the stories that we teach in schools today and what we've been over the last, what is that now? That's almost 700 years, 400 years, 500 years, something like that. Yeah. Anyway, how far off is what is being taught compared to what is real? And then we can break down what is real.
Well, you mean from the Bahamian perspective or from the global perspective? Because I could comment on both.
From what we are being taught in the Bahamas in particular, but now that the Bahamas is, let me not just say the Bahamas, but this region, because there's a lot of commonality for this region.
Right. Yeah, most definitely. Well, I've had discussions with many people throughout the Caribbean, many of my Pan-African counterparts, if you will, who are pretty much dealing with very similar issues. So when you look at places like Grenada, Dominica, Barbados, they have a very similar historical narrative to us. But for us, in my view, it's slightly worse because particularly when you look at the way, for example, that we view the loyalists, right? And Woods Rogers, I'll touch on both. So the loyalists, firstly, and I'll work my way back. But when you look at the loyalists arriving here, the population of the Bahamas was essentially about 1-to-1 white to black. When the loyalists arrived there, I think it increased to something like 6-to-1 or 7-to-1, right? Furthermore, about 45% of all people of color, black, and all those things in between, we can get into the construct of race too, right? But those who are at risk of being enslaved, if you will, it was about 45%. And after the loyalists arrived, that percentage doubled. And so we are taught to praise the loyalists. We are taught that Lord John Rule was this absentee slave owner and all of these things. We are taught that there was no appreciable profits made from our enslavement. All of these things that I can confidently tell you are blatant lies, and not that the people that put those things there did it with the intention of lying, because obviously we are the ones who kind of perpetuate these things. However, it is the result of the same gaslighting that you say. And I appreciate that you bring up the Haitian Revolution in the 20th century and then the Haitian Revolution in the 19th century, because I actually always argue that despite our supposed lack of appreciation of our African roots, even though our Junkanoo parade is evidence against that, I would say, but even though our stereotypical lack of appreciation for African roots, we have to understand that we shouldn't look at the past with a 21st century mindset. And this is also a part of that gaslighting. And so we surrounded by the three of the worst examples, or three quintessential examples of what happens when people of color, people of African descent, Africans, black people, however you want to look at it, gain even the slightest victory, So in the United States, of course, you see what happens in places like Tucson and these Black Wall Streets that are pretty much destroyed. We see what's going on with the Black Lives Matter movement. Cuba had their revolution, a communist socialist revolution, which is where many of the African leaders were trying to lean, you understand? And then we see the result of the embargoes that were placed on Cuba. Then, of course, Haiti is arguably the best example of this gaslighting, because people that we really should praise and commend, we actually are conditioned to hate. You understand? And when you even go back to the slave trade, it's no coincidence that the Haitian Revolution was won in 1804, and then the bill to end the slave trade was passed the year after, and then it came into an act in 1807, and then it actually ended in 1808, not 1807, but they, for some reason, love to add those little extra years on there. And the Haitian Revolution was central to the ending of the slave trade. And people don't realize that even like Simon Bolivar, who they call the Great Liberator, when he met with the Haitian emperor at the time, I believe, who was Henri Christophe said, okay, we will help you, but the first thing you got to do to prove this that you're real is you got to free your slaves. You understand? Just to scan over it quickly, you could almost pinpoint where Haitian xenophobia began in the Bahamas. If you go back to April 1795, this was right after the British were expelled from Haiti at an area in the northwestern extremity known as Mole St. Nicholas. Y'all could Google it, Wikipedia it if you want. But the thing is, you could actually see the fires from that revolution in Inagua at the time. And leading up to that, you had all of these Bahamian so-called British privateers who were quote-unquote sacking French ships and also taking their property. Now, this was so common that the transatlantic slave trade and the intra-American slave trade actually lessened during this period, because the influx of enslaved African people from Haiti was so strong at the time for almost 10 years. So, side note, no Bahamian of African descent or a white Bahamian could claim that they have pure blue blood, Bahamian blood, and don't have any Haitian ancestry. Now, we could put that on the side. In 1795.
But before you leave that, though, I think that's a critical point, because I mean, we have this xenophobia about people in our region, and I really believe that that we came through some special boat or fleet or chariot of fire from the sky or something. I don't know what it is that we believe, right? But to me, even the Haitians and the Cubans in particular, I mean, I only focus on those two because if you go to all, then we'd be here till 9, 10, 30 o'clock in the night. But what they put on the table and to allow us to do and coming into our own emancipation and the rest, they said that tsunami rolling. And that's my view. I mean, I don't know if you share that same view.
100%. Right, 100%. And for freedom all over, like with Simon Bolivar, like I was saying, about half of his troops were made up of Haitian soldiers. And of course, he's known as the great liberator of South America. So even in parts of the Caribbean, but any South American country with the yellow, blue, and red in their flag, Ecuador, Venezuela, Colombia, and of course, Bolivia, you know, these were nations that were quote unquote liberated and slavery was ended by Simon Bolivar, but they don't tell you that the vast, significant part of his troops were made up of Haitian soldiers. Right. And so that's one of the biggest parts of it. You know, they are the greatest liberators, and there's no coincidence that everywhere you see that Africans fight and actually won certain victories for their freedom, that you also see that these are some of the more underdeveloped parts of the world. And we have our history and our roots and our DNA is inextricably linked with that of both Cuba and Haiti. Yeah.
Okay, so once we have that scenario in mind and concept and thought, but then let's go back a little, I guess I say a little further back. There was this man called Columbus who was supposedly discovered us, right? I'd say he discovered the fact that he was lost and he figured out that there's something else out there versus what he thought was out there. So there's this view that, you know, he wiped out everybody in the Bahamas. And I have this view that some of the Taino Indians and the like went to different places and scattered because they got here from somewhere at some point. If everybody started in Africa, they had to come here. So it's not like they were just already here and then didn't know how to go nowhere else. And so I have friends who I went to school with who said that some of them went to Cuba and then the like, and maybe even came back. And there was always this big trade scenario with the southern Bahamas in the Nago area and Ragged Island and the rest with Cuba and Haiti. Right. And so I'm just thinking that there's a lot of cross-pollination, for lack of a better word. Yeah, that's the right. That's word. Yeah, I think that's the word.
Well, I actually partially share the same view because definitely, and especially knowing that they knew the land, you know, these were people like you and me. God forbid if somebody came to the Bahamas today and started doing the same thing, a lot of us would definitely be leaving to save ourselves and our family. However, and I got this information from Dr. Michael Pateman, Bahamian archaeologist, who I personally consider one of the foremost experts on Lucayan. So when I have a question about it, he is one of the guys I reach out to. You know, and also Dr. Grace Turner as well, who is the head of research at AMMC. And both of them have informed me that they haven't actually been finding any at all Lucayan DNA, which is distinct from that of the Tainos in Cuba, even though it's very closely related. And so it points to several possibilities from my interpretation, either that Columbus's visit here was far more brutal. You have to mention people like Ponce de Leon, because Ponce de Leon came after Columbus and did much of the same thing. Or maybe those that ran away and got away were just so few that over time, you know, the DNA just kind of, I don't know if it I'm not a geologist. Right, you understand what I'm saying? A genealogist, sorry, but, you know, but over time, you know, but the fact that we can't find a speck of Lucayan DNA speaks volumes to the level of horror that they probably experienced. Right now, you could Google all of Columbus's diaries. You also have people that were in his crew that, if there's a man in particular named Rodrigo de Triana, who I find very interesting. He was the first man to spot land. And in my interpretation, he was actually an African as well. And he came to the New World with Columbus as a Catholic. And he was so disgusted and perturbed by what had happened. When he moved back to Spain, he excommunicated himself from the Catholic Church and moved down to present-day Mali to become a Muslim. And I don't see a European fella doing something like that at that period of time in history, right? But Columbus swing him, as we would say in the Bahamas, because he was the first man that spotted land. And then Columbus pretty much is like, no, I spotted it first, you know? So he was a real swindler. Of course, we have to be careful not to give all of the blame for what happened to the Lucans to him, because there were others that followed that also did a lot of damage. But of course, he was the one that opened the door. When you read his diaries, it's very, very perplexing, and it's difficult for those who don't have a proper mind for historical interpretation, because he genuinely believed that he was ordained by God to come and do these things to these people.
Oh, Columbus?
Oh yeah, he genuinely believed that. And most people who read into it, either he genuinely believed it, or he was kind of doing this kind of mental gymnastics to convince himself of that, to justify all of the horrors that they were doing, you know, because there was a papal bull passed by the Catholic Church, Pope Nicholas V, if I'm not mistaken, but it was in 1452, June of 1452, named Dum Diversus, which was Latin for until different. And that was the papal bull that was passed that gave all European Christians the right to enslave and to place in perpetual servitude, to quote the document, perpetual servitude. So you, your children, your grandchildren, all of y'all, once you're the son of Ham, or you're a Sacriant, meaning you're a Muslim, or you ain't a Christian, they allowed to do that. And this is what set the precedence. And this was 40 years before Columbus landed here. So he came armed with this, you know, and that was the psychology. Now, men like Pizarro, for example, who was in South America, I don't truly believe that. I believe he was just a straight up evil man. But I believe that Columbus believed that he was somehow ordained by God to do all of these atrocities. And I'm not making any excuses for him. I'm just speaking from his point of view, you know, and even though, of course, it might have been a subconscious justification, but he's not a man that should be celebrated. But at the same time, I wish that the guy that destroyed the statue would have did it with a little more of a political fervor, if that makes sense. Not knocking him and what he did. Of course, I'm sure many people are happy that it was done to a certain degree. But I just wish that it was done with more political decorum and contextualizing Columbus more, even though I sympathize with him reaching his breaking point. And it's interesting that he targeted the Columbus statue as the symbol for you know, lashing out to him reaching his breaking point.
When we had Dr. Nicolette Bethel on the show, and we talked a little bit about that in terms of also whether stuff like the lockdowns and the rest of those inspired or motivated behavior beyond what would be considered normal. But I think Columbus really should go because he is a part of our past and stuff at the head of the harbor. Where out of our sight, but in the sight of the tourists, so that they could have fun looking at him and saying, "Oh, this and oh that" and stuff, and give us their money and whatever you want. Then, but we're not affected by it. I mean, that's just my thoughts on it. So when we look at this whole thing, though, wasn't there the Chinese? I mean, when we watch these old kung fu movies and stuff like that, you see the Chinese and the rest of them going from way back in history. And the Vikings will be on the boats with all these. Were they before, after, or in between Columbus and those? Because they somehow we got from Africa to this part of the world.
They just skipped. Right. Well, the big problem is the period of history. History in itself is very Eurocentric, even the way that they classify history and these different periods, like the Bronze Age and the Stone Age and all that. Just know that most of that is actually centered around European history, particularly when you look at the period they call the medieval period, the quote-unquote Dark Ages. That actually represented a golden age for Africa. At the time, not the modern country of Ghana, but the Kingdom of Ghana, for example, in the 1000s, I guess, if you will. This was at a time when the Vikings and King Rollo, you know, they show you the Viking show on Netflix and all the king. This when they was doing all that. And at this point, you know, we had cities like one, for example, is called Kumbi Sela, KHOUMBISALEH, for those who want to Google it. And you could put that on the side of a picture of ancient Egypt or any of the more well-known ancient African cities, and you wouldn't be able to tell the difference, right? And the king at that time, he could summon over 100,000 people on land to battle. And there was a man named El Bakri who was actually from Spain, a Catholic man from Spain. And he was so taken aback by the level of gold and riches these fellas had. Like, gold was like nothing to them. And he also questioned their manhood because of the level of political power that they allowed women to have in their kingdom, right? And he was actually ridiculing them for it. And in his ridiculing of them, he actually, what he showed you was of society in the 1000s in Africa that was more progressive than early 20th century United States of America, at least from a women's rights perspective, you know. So what was happening with us is usually overlooked. You also had Mapungubwe, or Great Zimbabwe as it's more commonly known, which is South Africa. You know, they even talk much about South Africa.
Right.
Zimbabwe actually means Great House of Stone. And so, and there were also people taken from that region, though only about 2% during the transatlantic slave trade as well. And of course, Kombi Sala is right there in West Africa, you know, and those are the same people that migrated and that we now know as the Akan people.
Right.
And their biggest group within them is known as the Ashanti people. And Ashanti means because of war. So it's interesting to tie this into something else, how when people talk about the Ma'afa, if you will, meaning the beginning and of all of this oppression and slavery and colonization in Africa, usually you have so many differing times. You know, some people say 500 years, some people say 400 years, some people say 1,000 years, some people say 4,000 years, some people say 2,000 years. And all of these dates, some dated to when the Hyksos first invaded ancient Egypt and Nubia. Some dated to when the Greeks and Hannibal and all of these people, you understand? And so you can kind of get the gist of it. Some dated to when the Arabs started to encroach and wipe out and commit genocides throughout North Africa, killing off the Berber and many other groups that were black, like quote unquote black, like me and you, but are now mostly Arab and populated by Arab people. And you know, so, and then some people, of course, started from the beginning of the transatlantic slave trade. It's a very complex issue, but it's interesting that you make that parallel, because the Vikings and those were before the transatlantic slave trade, but they were not before the Arab slave trade.
Right.
And the Arab slave trade existed for at least half a millennium before the European one did, even though the European one was very unprecedented, extremely brutal in every way, shape, or form, not negating the Arab slave trade. But as a historian, and to be truthful, it was far more humane, because you don't see any great African Christian kingdoms that were popping up in that time and space. You have Aksum, which was far before that. You know, you have certain parts of Egypt that were long before that. And then you have the Kingdom of Congo that first contacted with the Portuguese. And even though they converted to Catholicism, they still were enslaved. You understand? And so, but with the Muslims and the Islamics, you see great African Islamic kingdoms that rise and fall all throughout that period. And so that fact alone tells you that the Arabic slave trade, though brutal and still ongoing to this day, was not even comparable in many ways to the transatlantic slave trade, which is what our ancestors suffered. Right.
Yeah. So I hope persons were listening, particularly my brother and sister out there, because you said that, you know, how a black like me and you, right? And, you know, they always say I was the white boy, but, you know, but we can touch on that after the break, which we can come up with in a couple of minutes. But before we get to that, though, couple of things. One was you said that the Taino Indian and the Lucayan Indians were different, but they always talk about the Taino Indians being across the whole region.
Right.
How were they different?
They were different a little bit in their DNA, because there was several hundred years when the Lucayans kind of settled, and this is including Turks and Caicos too, by the way.
Okay.
What was called the Lucayos, or the Lucayan archipelago, whatever you want to refer to it as. And so for a number of years, they were different. Now, linguistically, they were probably very similar, but you would almost think of it as a difference between a Bahamian and a Jamaican. Even though we are probably more closely related to them through our DNA coming from Africa. However, you know, there are certain differences that make us a distinct people from the Jamaican people, not from a Pan-African sense, but just from a geopolitical sense, from a linguistic sense, from a food culture, you know, all of these things, you know. They good at soccer, we good at basketball, you know, just little things like that, both trivial and meaningful. Right.
And so the other one was, I think it was Helen Bartlett Hannah asked the question earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Is this information being put in our schools? Yeah,
No,
sorry.
but
Is the history built into our school curriculum?
not
This history. Sorry.
not the one that I know of. I just saw one of my nephews. They still using the Making of the Bahamas book, and this where I mean I gotta ruffle some feathers here. You know, the book is written by Philip Cash. I don't know if anyone know who Philip Cash was, but Philip Cash, you know, all right. So I need to get into it. And the school that he was associated with, and the history of that school being a formerly segregated school.
Right.
And this book was written right during that period, and we still using it. In this book, Philip Cash claims that Governor Fenney was the one that started the straw making industry in the Bahamas. Governor Fenney had a role to play, but the way that Governor Fenney, of course, he didn't start it. It was Africans that started it.
Right.
But the way that he, I would say, galvanized it was because he owned the first slave ship that came here from Ghana. Right. Philip Cash knew that, but he didn't want to say that. What he can tell you is, he is the one who started the straw industry. He ain't gonna tell you the man was a slave trader. And they ain't gonna tell you that Woods Rogers was a slave trader either. And they make it seem like us coming under colonial fold was a good thing. But it's not in our curriculums. And they mention these fellas, and what we have in Bahamian schools for the most part, though it is beginning to change, more so at the behest of some of the great teachers that we have, you know. But essentially what we have in the Bahamas is European history in the Bahamas. And most people think history is just listing off the governors. You know what I mean? I see history listing off the governors, saying which loyalist was the nicest one to their slaves and all that. People calling William Wiley and calling James Carmichael Smith abolitionists and all type of foolishness. You know? When we have people who fought and died for us, we even had ruined societies here in the Bahamas, but I can keep that one to myself for this one.
Yeah.
You gotta bring me back for that one.
Because at the rate we go in, I only a quarter to way through my questions, and we're already almost at an hour. So that might be the case that's gonna happen. But let me ask this question there. So did we come from or of these places?
Oh yeah.
I've heard these words put to me in a session that I was at with historians talking, and they said there's a difference, and even some religious people saying there's a difference between coming from and being of.
Well, I can speak frankly right there too. That, in my view, is just a result of the same gaslighting that you talk about. And what they should ask themselves, I don't mean to insult anybody, let's look at history honestly and truthfully. The side that call themselves the Christians were the ones doing all the raping, all the enslaving, all the killing, all making all the money from all of this stuff. And the people who they claim, because I heard that statement before too, and they meant it in the context of how Africans worship, how Africans practice spirituality and all of that stuff. I don't know if who you spoke to meant it in that same context, but
yeah, I'm not sure how they meant it, but that's what they said.
But that's usually the context is meant in. And you have to ask yourself, how is it that they who call themselves Christians and the ones who follow Jesus and the ones who do all this stuff, they committing all the murders, all the rapes, and the ones they claim doing the voodoo, doing the witchcraft are the victims of said murder, rapes. And somehow we've been gaslighted into thinking that the ones getting killed is the evil ones. And the ones who proclaim just because they get Jesus on the tip of their tongue and the tip of their mouth, all of a sudden they're the good ones. So I could do anything to anybody, but if I call Jesus' name, that makes me good. Come on, man, we gotta get real, you know. And that I'll just pose another very obvious question. If two poodles, no, let me put it another way. If two pit bulls has puppies in a poodle kennel, are they poodles or are they pit bulls?
Are they poodles or are they pit bulls?
If me and my wife is a poodle, is a pit bull, sorry, and then we leave where the pit bulls are, two pit bulls, and we go to a poodle's kennel, and we have puppies. Those puppies are still pit bulls, right?
Yeah.
If two rabbits, if you put, I can use a quote from one of my favorites, Dr. Ben. If you take two rabbits and put it in the oven, and those rabbits have little baby bunnies, do you call those baby bunnies biscuits?
I heard that one before. Yeah.
Right. You understand what I'm saying? So that's just an attempt to disassociate ourselves with Africa. Because we believe that Africa is wrong and it's this and it's that, you know, and we got to move past that, man. you know, and especially when you realize that even within the Bible, for those that believe or don't believe, you know, most of the historical figures in the Bible are African, the ones that you could actually point to. The Queen of Sheba is Empress Makeda, Ethiopia.
Right.
General Tahaka, the liberator of Jerusalem, but they don't talk about these in churches for some reason, you know. And if Jesus was in quote unquote black, he was born in Bethlehem. Bethlehem is at the gateway of Europe, the gateway of Asia, and the gateway to Africa. So if Herod and his navy and his army and all these police and all these people looking for the new baby Jesus, why would you send a white, blonde-haired, blue-eyed baby to go hide in Africa?
Yeah.
Why not send him to
There's
you know?
a lot of illogical things that people have, and we tend to like to write our history, to suit our needs versus what it is. And that's why I always say to my brother when we have this discussion that there's the past, and then there's history. And history to me is man's story or his story. That's the way I look at it. Somebody who wrote it the way they want to write it. So my namesake, let me tell you about this gentleman here. His name Dale Shallow on the screen there.
All right.
I don't know if you know him, but he and I are born one day apart.
Wow.
Right? We were in the same class at school. And so sometimes the teachers used to get mixed up as to what they wanted to call people. But he's also the sort of historian himself, or would like to be a historian, because we say that. I could say that's my classmate. Right? I mean, he doesn't do it full time like you or the like, but I'm sure he is well and good. He's a big Junkanoo man and so forth. So, but yes, he talked here about Mr. Philip Cash and the like, being a teacher and all of that kind of stuff. But when I look at this whole picture now coming out of the majority rule movement and the like, it brings me right back to this last question I have before we go to the break, and then we could decide some things. Would be is that two questions: are we really Bahamians?
Well, I would say we Africans in the Bahamas. But of course, the problem is people don't know what being Bahamian, being Jamaican, being from the United States, being Canadian, being English, being Dutch, you know, geopolitical loyalty has nothing to do with your biology. You know, you have certain countries where, of course, there are certain ethnicities that are represented, but it has nothing to do with your biology and your ethnicity.
Right.
So a Chinese person could move from China today, come to the Bahamas, fall in love with the Bahamas and say, but I don't want to be Chinese no more. And he could burn his Chinese passport. And if we accept him, and if he able to get his Bahamian passport, he is now a Bahamian.
Right.
And this is what leads to some of the xenophobia as well. And it's not negating what Bahamianness is per se. You just have to understand what it is. It is your geopolitical loyalty. So in simple terms, God ain't make the Bahamas. So if you don't recognize this false line that we created between the Bahamas and Turks and Caicos, you understand what I'm saying? Now, what you could say God made is you, your ethnicity, your biology, and your genetic makeup, which is different than your geopolitical state. You understand? Your geopolitical loyalty, I should say. And so I wouldn't go so far to say there's no such thing as a Bahamian. But when you put it into that context, and then you also put it into the context of not the event of independence, to quote people like Dr. Curry and Ian Mora and all them, you know, independence is a shout out, is a process,
right?
And it's not just this singular event. And when we realize all of that, this is why questions that you raise have to be raised, you know. And it's not just a question for the Bahamas; it's also a question for Ghana. It's also a question for Jamaica. You know, Sizzler, the popular reggae artist, he have a song called Freedom Cry. And in the end of that song, from a Pan-African standpoint, he say, hey, down in the West, me, I ain't gonna fly, no flag with no X. And he mean it, I ain't no Jamaican, I is African, you know? Now, for me, I African before I'm anything. I'm African before I'm a Davis. I'm African before I'm a Bahamian, because every single one of those things are social constructs. Even though the term African is a social construct to a degree, but it speaks to my ethnicity and my biology, how God made me in layman's terms. You understand? So I hope I answered the question, but it's geopolitical loyalty. You know, it's not ethnicity and people, oh yeah, you get Haitian blood in you get Jamaican blood, and it's all foolishness, right?
Yeah, because I mean, I think it's Doctor. I don't know if he's Doctor. Neil Ellis, Bishop Neil Ellis, and I think it's Farrakhan also both spoke to that process that you just spoke of before.
Right.
And the like. So, Madam Producer, you put the one back up from Leslie Vanderpool just now. Why I so laughing just now? Sometimes, my name is Happy, so I can't always control myself. But Leslie say, please bring Chris back. We need a whole week.
Thank you.
So I thought you need to get that kudos there from them.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right. And so before we go to the break where we'll make a decision or two on some things here, and ask this last question is, are we who we say we are?
I would answer that with a yes and a no. See, this where our culture and heritage come in. Culturally, we are who we say we are, because culture is really what you do every day, all day. Okay. So that includes the bad, the good, and the bad. Now, heritage is where we go wrong. They had this recent craze of people actually doing their DNA. Right. And there's been, I actually did one of the memes myself, but there's been several memes going all around the world where you have people of African descent, and they'd be like 80% all over Africa, 5% indigenous American, 15% Scottish. And actually, the fella going to Scotland wearing a kilt and eating haggis. You understand what I said? So, but I just like to use simplified analogies for people. If you have a basket of apples, you understand? And that basket of 20 apples, 18 of those apples are red and 2 are green.
Right.
You can't say that that's a basket of green apples.
Right.
You could more so say that it's a basket of red apples, but then you could also acknowledge, but two green apples in there. You understand what I'm saying? And that's what it is. But again, it's that, even the quote that you mentioned earlier, is that inherent need to separate ourselves from Africa because of what is associated with Africa. And we love to say that we are a Christian nation and all of that, and along the lines throughout history we have been convinced that African customs, spirituality, things, and even we still do it, it's so that's what I find so funny, like things like bush medicine. You could read the Obia Act, right? And if you was drink sorcery, you practicing under the British law Obia. Because it say even for restoring a person to health. And while we was deprived of medicine, even though I actually wrote a paper about how African medicine has always been superior to European medicine up until the early 20th century, at least, and essentially that's what it was. So you using bush medicine to heal yourself through the eyes of the British. That was Obia and voodoo, and so again, practicing ASU, even things that we do in certain churches, friendlies, these are things, people that, certain churches are more vibrant than others. You have something called executive possession that is distinctly African. Right. Yeah, people catching the spirit that is distinctly African, so you could run from it all you want. It in us. We used to do Junkanoo when I was a diehard Valley boy, but I'll admit, when the Saxons come down, if they sound good, I can bounce.
Start rocking. Yeah.
I can start rocking, and I can still hate and talk about them bad, but I can still be rocking while I do it. Yeah. So it's certain things that are just in us. The way we speak, words like tingum, the cadence that we speak in, the syntax that we speak in. We don't speak broken English. We speak Gullah and Geechee. Right. And Gullah and Geechee is also shared by the people on the United States southeastern seaboard. And that comes from places like Liberia, Angola, the Igbo and the Yoruba of Nigeria. So we are African, and again, you can deny it all you want, but it's in us. The way we dance, the way we move, the music that we make, the food that we make. They get jollof rice all over West Africa, peas and rice all over West Africa, okra and rice all over West Africa. Yeah. Eating fish, stew fish with dipping all type of dough and thing inside the fish all over West Africa. Come on, man. Stew fish and Johnny cake.
Fish is a popular dish these days.
Quote Ronnie Butler.
Yeah. Well, folks, you've been listening to Something to Think About with Dale Happy Knowles. We're here with Chris Ömo-Shango Davis.
Yes.
The man who travels all the way to Ghana. Yeah. Multiple times a year. He has a lot of things on his plate right now. We look forward to people like Leslie, those finding ways to help him put some of these in video.
All right,
It's a video I'm talking about. Movie video. I'm just talking about this kind of video.
Well, we can talk off air about that because I actually have some things in the motions right now. So
okay, awesome.
If you're all interested, yeah.
So we're gonna pay the piper and let the sponsors be seen, and then we're gonna come back, and by then we will decide how we move forward.
Okay.
All right, Madam Producer.
Sammy's Chicken. There's nothing like it.
ID Star, God of 242 Elite. And I just want to tell y'all all about a great experience crossing Orlando this past month. We had some fundraisers. We want to thank everyone for reaching out to us. We want to send a special thank you to our Coach D and Knowles. He really did well taking care of us and looking after us for the past month. Everything that we did, it was awesome. We had really great experience. We played plenty games, man. Like, we really played a lot of games. We had some scrimmages in there. Felt like I was in school. We wake up every morning for mobility. Right after that, we probably go do some ball handling. If not, we have game right after. He's putting in about 2-3 games a day. I'm telling you, we play him about 3 to 4 times a week. It was a really great experience. It was well worth it. And I really hope that we continue the ball. I just want to ask anyone that's out there in Freeport or probably just in the Bahamas, still in school, trying to play ball, build on your skill. D1 Development is a really great program. Y'all should try and get out at it. But 242 Elite is a really great traveling program.
Welcome back to Something to Think About with Dale Happy Knowles. We're here this evening talking to Chris Ömo-Shango Davis, who is a historian and many more things along the way. He's having a very enlightening conversation, and it's about him enlightening us on our roots. And roots in the morning, roots.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, our roots, and whether we are being gaslighted about our roots as to whether we're from the Africa, Haiti, Cuba, etc. And we've walked down a long road so far. And Chris, whilst we were out, we were trying to confirm whether you had a hard stop or not, because from some of the inboxes that we've been getting, people want you to stay on. I don't know what was your time like, whether we could continue or we just need to close off and then come back another time.
We could do a little while longer.
A little while longer. Okay.
We go a little while longer.
We know we want you to come back for a specific project at a specific time.
Right.
You know,
Yes,
don't
sir.
overkill them with you. But anyway, awesome. So, folks, remember to put your questions up because we want to address as much as you can with you. And so, Holly Bino here says, Chris, that is done. What are done of the steps post-colonial countries can take to start to combat all of this cultural amnesia and erasure? What's our plan to liberalize and freedom?
Oh, well, that's Sister Holly. Yeah, that's a good one. Well, we have to realize the reality of the state that we're in. Sadly, you know, nobody could actually point to a specific moment in history where we have crossed this imaginary or proverbial finish line. And even when you look at things like the civil rights movement in the United States, well, you find out that, hey, well, that was just really a big farce, and integration actually did more harm because it destroyed Black businesses and all of these different things, further gentrified communities. When you even look at emancipation, whether it's the Bahamas or the United States, the Spanish Empire, the slave master was actually compensated. And it was a massive payday for them, actually.
Right.
And that was what made them make the money and gain the comfort so that they could move into what they call the Industrial Revolution. And when you look at the crux of the Industrial Revolution, you see things like cotton textiles, so where they're getting all this cotton from, you know. And then, of course, so it's just about digging into our history. I know it might sound biased because I'm a historian and I'm trying to get people to get into that, but it's the truth though. History is the most unifying force. So let's look at the United States. Let's look at the Karens and the Chads of the United States, if you will, the conservative white mindset of the United States. All of them are firmly grounded on their history, and it's one big lie. Even though it's a lie, all of them believe it. You know, they believe that their forefathers were great, honorable men who only believed in freedom and justice, and that the American way is all about liberty and all of this stuff, and how they beat the British. And they don't like to talk about the war 1812, but they can talk about independence all day. They ain't talk about Canada being bigger than the United States in terms of the landmass, but they can say, you understand? So that's what it is for us. And we have to stop buying in to these Eurocentric narratives. And when we look at Eurocentric narratives, we have to take that with a grain of salt. And then we have to start looking back. And that's why I went to Port-Kasu in Ghana, Princess Town. You know, there's a man in Port-Kasu, the chief of Port-Kasu. His name is Yaw. I don't even want to butcher his first name. His first name has 9 syllables. Abou, right? I don't want to butcher it. Apologies, but Yaw Augustine. Chief Yaw Augustine. This man sits in the same throne that Junkanoo sat in. Okay. Right now. When I shook this man's hand, I could just melt, you know? And I don't even know if they realized the level of awe that I have, that this is a man that sits in the throne, right? That Junkanoo sat in. And then you start to get the real true essence of Junkanoo itself, you know, and we know it's a warrior thing to it, you know. We know that it was kind of watered down to suit and be more palatable to tourists, you know. And so all of these are things we have to dig into. And the Bahamas has so many family historians, you know, but it's just that we look at it through European lenses, and we have to start looking at it through Bahamian lenses, through African lenses, you know, and look at all sides. And there are so many unsung Bahamian heroes. And one of the people that came here, as a matter of fact, in 1734, his name was Kwamina. And he is one of the people that links the Bahamas directly to the same region where Junkanoo was functioning. And what made me wonder is, how is it that we have the biggest Junkanoo celebration in the world? Ours is actually bigger than the one in Princess Town because they only have about 5,000-6,000 people, right? However, we have the biggest Junkanoo commemoration in the world. They also have it in Jamaica in certain communities. They have it in Belize. It's manifested as a play, but it's not as loved as it is in the Bahamas. You have it in Suriname, Guyana. You even have essence of it in the old United States, in the southern United States in the 1800s, and different all over. Why is it that all of these places have a Khan, people from modern day Ghana, national heroes? So you go to Jamaica, you see Queen Nani, Captain Cujo. Right. You go to Guyana, you see Kofi. You go to Antigua, you see Kwaku. You go to Virgin Islands, you see Brefu. When I was in Ghana and I was calling out all these names, some of the people was raising their hand saying, hey, that's my name.
Right.
You understand? I say, oh, that's my mommy name, that's my auntie name, that's my son name. I was meeting people named Kwame, and I met about 25 people named Kwame. The same name that the other man that came here from that same region in Ghana. You understand? And Kwame's plan, like his Akan revolutionary counterparts, was to kill all the colonizers in the island, starting with Governor Fitzwilliam. And see, this was one of the reasons that galvanized him to build a safe space for the governor. You understand? Kwame came here. He is actually misnomered as Quarino. It was a simple mistranslation, and I saw the documents. And when I saw that man was Kwame, my wife would tell you I had tears rolling down my eyes because I knew the connection had been made. This is our Akan revolutionary counterpart that coincides with all of the vestiges of Junkanoo. So when you look at Suriname, it exists in two of the Akan Maroon communities.
Okay.
You look at Jamaica, it manifests in places like Cujo Town and Akumpong and Cormantian. These are towns in Jamaica, and they are also towns in Ghana by the same exact name. You understand? And so we are inextricably linked with these people. And Junkanoo was never no slave. After he had committed many of the, or done many of these military feats, for example, defeating the British in 1712 at Fort Meadowcross in present-day Dix Cove. And they like to say that Junkanoo was given to us on Christmas Day by the British. Well, one of Jan Qual's military strategies was to actually wait until Christmas Day to invade these European forts, to, as we say in the Bahamas, catch them slipping. Right. So when they drunk and they eating and they merry and they doing all that, that's when Jan Qual, aka Junkanoo, was attacking these fellas. You understand? After he had severed ties with the Germans, after they sold their possessions to the Dutch without even telling him, that was when his true colors came out, and it was revealed that he was just using his alliance with the Prussians to actually garner these weapons and these cannons. And the people there actually went to Pockesu playing devil's advocate, talking about, well, in the Bahamas, they tell us this man was just a big-time slave trader. And boy, these people, at one point I thought this can roll me out, and then I had to reveal myself and be like, no, man, I was only playing devil's advocate, because that was my theory all along. Why would we make such a huge hero out of this man? And this goes back to Harley's question. We've been doing this parade. This is something that all of us love. Even white Bahamians rush now. You understand? And I think that we in a time,
but they're not white.
Right.
I'm gonna tell you, everybody comes from. That's the thing with people, right?
White in the Bahamas, right? Let's clear that up. We get into that too, you know. But essentially, those that identify as what I should say in the Bahamas even love and appreciate Junkanoo. And I believe that we're in a time and a space now where people could view the past, and you could in certain modes in history, certain times in history, it's clear who the good guy and the bad guy is, to simplify it, you know. And this is one of those cases, you know. And when we realize who this man Junkanoo was, Jan Kwa, his real name, Gyankawaw. This man was just absolutely amazing. And the more I learn about him, he was not wealthy because he was trading in slaves. One of the reasons he was so wealthy was because he controlled one of the major freshwater reserves in that entire region. And this region was in the southern extremity and the western extremity of present-day Ghana. Right. He also controlled all of the gold in the area. He had troops of over 15,000 people, made up not only of Ahanta people, who he was from, also the Nzima, the Wassa, the Ga, the Ewe, all of these different groups, about 20 different groups of Africans in there, you know. And that's why one of the theses of this book that I'm working on now is that Junkanoo is actually a unifying force. And to put it in a nutshell, when you look at the early British transatlantic slave trade and the early Dutch transatlantic slave trade, they almost exclusively took them from that Gold Coast region. And so the first 4 slave ships that came directly from Africa, one of which was owned by Governor Fenney, George Fenney, and the other one was owned by Woodes Rogers and his family. And that was the one that this man Kwame actually arrived on in 1730. And ironically, that ship was called the Nassau. So when Woodes Rogers came, and he said, expel pirates and restore commerce, that commerce was turning the Bahamas into a full-fledged slaving state. And he was even looking at my beloved homestead in the Bahamas, Kid Island, looking to make Kid Island, talking about, oh, Kid Island is perfect to have all of these sugar plantations. This man wanted the workers to death, and they wanted to emulate other colonies like Saint-Domingue, which is present-day Haiti, which was the richest colony in the West at the time, almost 3 times richer than the United States in the zenith. So these are
the richest,
right, in many ways,
Bahamas,
exactly. Just the people poor, well, that's a whole other thing. It's like Africa, the people poor, but Africa is not poor, right? And again, to just, or she said, as Nzima, it's Nzima, Nzema. Nzima is actually a twin group of the Ahanta people, and the capital city is known as Takoradi and Sekondi, and Ahanta actually means twin. These Ahanta people are absolutely amazing. As we do more research and as I reveal more, you all see exactly why. And why their history has been swept under the rug, especially as it pertains to their connection to us over here in the West. And just to close on this point and to sum up all of what Holly was talking about, there's another Ahanta king. So Junkanoo was actually the chief of a region, but he wasn't the big king of all Ahanta. One of the big kings of all Ahanta lived a full 100 years after Junkanoo, and his name was Nana Bonsu II.
And I got 100 years after.
After Junkanoo.
How old did he live to be?
Well, Junkanoo was actually he lived a very long time, because I learned on my last trip from Brother Alex Kofi that he was the king in the mid-1680s. Sorry, in the mid-1680s he was the king, but he was not at his heights yet.
Right.
He aligned himself with the Prussians and essentially used his Prussian allyship and the rivalry. It's so funny because he used the same thing they claimed that the Europeans did, was what Junkanoo was doing. He was using this European rivalry against them and playing these fellas like fools, all the while protecting everyone under his kingdom that he had there in the Southwest from the transatlantic slave trade. He had a giant wall from the lagoon to the river, and he had a rule that even if you go to pick berries, you got to carry 50 people with you to make sure these Europeans, not Africans, don't enslave you. And his story goes against the narrative of Africans enslaving other Africans. And at the same time, they don't use the narrative when they talk about World War II. Western Europeans who are far less diverse than West Africans, and they wouldn't say, well, look at these Europeans fighting against each other. But when it suits their narrative and it suits easing their collective guilty conscience and vindicating them in a historical sense, they love to say Africans enslaving other Africans, even though these were a diverse group of people, number one, and number two, even though you have countless examples of those that fought against the transatlantic slave trade. But then you begin to understand why the story had to be appropriate. You can't have Africans in the Bahamas marching around talking about they praising Junkanoo, and this the man who was spanking up the British and the Dutch early 1700s. You understand?
Yeah.
They had to change the narrative, so then it become this thing where we just having fun, masquerade, and all of a sudden, despite all of the evidence we have, somehow they tell us that the white man allowed us to do this.
Right. Yeah.
You understand?
So, yeah. But that's part of the gaslighting there. But Rosemary Hannah asked the question: how do we get this information in our schools? And I would just suggest this one: that first we need to get it documented, as Chris is doing in his work. And so anybody out there who willing to fund his work or assist him with that would be great, because that will help to get the information documented first. And then once you get it documented, you can package it. And then I'm sure he has good connections where he could use to get
I hope so.
The audience, right? So,
well, I'm personally a big fan of the present Minister of Education. I feel that she is just one of the best positive examples of a politician, despite so many bad examples that we have. She is one I've always admired. And so I'd love to reach out to her and discuss with her. And even with her in that post, I'm confident that a lot of the stuff that I'm talking about and that other great historians, of course, Dr. Curry, who is also a mentor of mine. Right. You mentioned another person I see as a mentor, Dr. Nicolette Bethel. Right. They don't be over my shoulder while I researching, but it's actually her research, because her and her father Clement, of course, these were the first people to really start to delve into this thing that we call Junkanoo. Right. And they were the first ones to challenge the notion that this was something given to us by the British. And that's what gave me the bravery and gave me the platform to then dig even further, and of course, many, many others, but I think that it will get into the curriculum. I think that it might get a small fight from those that have benefited from perpetuating a certain historical narrative, unfortunately. But I also believe that the people's will prevail in that sense, and people thirsting for their real history, and
Right.
I just find it, even though it's a kind of labor of love for me right now, but I find it still extremely fulfilling. Like I say, tears come, I could spend months and don't find anything significant, and when I find something that sometimes something that I'm not even looking for, and I able to put certain stories together and piece them together, sometimes I laugh with joy and happy with joy, and sometimes it makes me cry, especially some of the examples of slave ships that landed here. Yeah.
Well, I touched on the Haiti part from Bacon. I don't know if you know, but I'm a descendant of Stephen Dillett, and
Oh, wow, all right.
When we go to that, and a lot of people have this argument as to whether he was a white man, whether he was a black man, whether whatever it is, right? But Joseph Eugene Dillett, according to Sean McQueen, he would have been an inside son on the original Stephen Dillett, and he left as a young man, and he went to Guyana, and then the West Indies Regiment,
Right.
and then he was on to Sierra Leone. That's how you pronounce it?
Sierra Leone, right? Yeah, Sierra Leone. Yeah.
So that's another connection going back that way based on.
Well, Sean McQueen is
that you
another.
mentioned just now, right?
Sean McQueen is another probably unknown mentor. I've read all of his books, and I've drawn a lot from his books, particularly on my outlook on race and racial, this very own unique racial Bahamian critical theory that we have, and Stephen Dillett, personally himself, the first Stephen Dillett, I should say, that came here, he came, remember, his father was a French officer. His mother was, an African, and essentially, he came here. And Stephen Dillett is very interesting for me because I actually could make a strong comparison to W.B. Du Bois, where in the beginning, though he simply because of who he was, of course, he represented Black people, quote unquote, Black people, but at the same time, he may not have shared the sentiment that he himself was a Black man. But then through his experiences and as he got older, he kind of, as you would say, crossed over or had the right sort of mentality, at least as in regards to his outlook on race, He was central in one of our uprisings in 1832 in the election where he was one of the people that won a seat. And of course, most people know him as the first person of color to win a seat. But he was coming from a time and a space, remember, in the French racial system is very different than the British one, and even more so the Bahamian one, And so even someone like you, even in a place like Cuba, race is very different. And it's again running from Africa, running from being identified as African. And so you have, like in Haiti, for example, there's over 100 different gradations of race. Whereas in the Bahamas, you are about between 6 and 8, depending on the time and the space, And like you use the term Sambo, for example, that had numerous meanings in different places. But in the Bahamas, it essentially meant that you had one white grandparent.
Right.
You understand? That's what a Sambo meant in the Bahamas. It was literally about accounting for the amounts of the drops of Black blood that you had, which is very different than the one drop rule in the United States, where, I don't know if you know Quincy Jones' daughter, famous actress Rashida Jones, and he literally looks very, very quote unquote white. And she is up to remind people that, hey, I Black and I identify as Black, even though I'm very light skinned with straight hair and all of that stuff. That's Quincy Jones' daughter.
I thought people, as light as I am, my mom is lighter than me.
Yeah.
My parents is dark, right? Her sister is dark. So there's color and so forth. So to me, that doesn't decide who you are. And so that was the next part of the question, which was in terms of our complexions. We tend to look at people's complexions and then determine who they are or what they are, what they're not. Yeah. My mom will tell you some stories about it in the 50s, 60s when she would have been going to Grand Bahama, Freeport area, and when they saw her, she might have passed to a certain degree, but then when they saw her children, that was passport revoked. You're not getting in indicates the way we were, and that's a story by itself.
Oh yeah.
I mean, that era of time, in the dependent era of history that we really need to dig into too in those early days before majority rule and the like. But I always ask the question of people who say that they are black in the Bahamas, and they say, oh, you white, you're this and stuff. I said, do you know if you're really black or you're not black? Because if we look at all of these, the mulattoes, the quadroons, the Sambos, I think it's mesquites and whatever, all those different things that people list and stuff like that. How do you know what you really are? Because, like I said, my mom is light, but her parents and her grandparents are dark.
My view of it is that we should do away with all of those terms, really and truly. You know what I mean? It's just something that's almost unexplainable, first and foremost. You could see a person, the way they walk, the way they talk, the way they look, the way they speak, you know what I mean? If they suck their teeth or not, all of these are different things that, you know, but remember, it's important to remember race is a social construct, so there'll never really be a definitive answer. And these terms like mulatto, musty, and all of that stuff, these are terms that were meant to demean us, even though now these are the terms that we identify ourselves with, but it's a testament to how gaslighted we've actually been, right? Now, in my view, and particularly from a Pan-African view, once a person is of clear and obvious African descent or identifies as such, then they quote unquote black. Now, me personally, I use it for common vernacular, but when I say black, I mean African. That's what I mean.
Know what you mean.
And that's exactly what it means. But, you know, we have, even though race is a social construct, it's a very real social construct. And it's a very, I don't want to say valid social construct, but it's very significant because it affects our destinies. It affects how we view each other, how we treat each other, all of these different things. It's even like money. Money is a social construct based solely on the faith that we put in it. But I ain't gonna say I can give you all my money because it's a social construct, you know? Yeah,
but I mean, you know, it goes back to identity. That's the key thing, right? I mean, my thing is that scientists have said that they've proven that everybody came from Africa, and first Africans were black. So we tend to have,
mitochondria Eve. That's what they call the woman that gave birth to all Homo sapiens in the world today. Mitochondria Eve.
Okay.
Right. And her DNA is inside every living human being. From Adolf Hitler, he come from her, I come from her, you come from her, Martin Luther King come from her, and Malcolm X come from her, you know.
Right.
So Malcolm X and Hitler come from that same, you know. So so of course, it's not to swash over the history and the realities that we live in, but it shows you the fallacy of race, and it actually, in my view, exacerbates all of these things that happen because it's not even based on any foundation, scientific or otherwise, you know.
But if we look at that, I look at that and say, okay, if we now know these things, then from an intellectual point of view, that means that we should now be moving back to the point where we are one. You know, that there is no divide or no separation. So we have different complexions and this and that. So,
exactly.
We need to now be moving in a direction where we all getting into that oneness, and we just see people. We don't see nothing else. It's going to take time. Yes, we know that because I mean pains and stuff.
There's a white Bahamian, and he ain't pretend white. He actually white, blonde hair, blue eyes, all that stuff.
Okay.
He did his 23andMe with the DNA thing, and he came out over 20% African. You know, and so we have to realize actually how superficial our exterior actually is. You know, your complexion and all of that stuff, it really has very little to do. It has significance, of course, but it has, at the end of the day, very little to do with your actual biological being, your genes and all of that stuff, you know?
Yeah. Because I mean, I have a friend who was in school with me at the U in Miami, and he isn't as dark as you, but I mean, he's dark. But when he did his DNA thing, most would say he came from Ireland and up in that area. The majority of what's in his DNA package.
Well, it's very complex, and See, there's many different strains of thought on it too. And again, like I say, it's very complex. You will have some that will argue that, the African gene is dominant. And so many of my counterparts in the Pan-African world, what they did is adopt the one drop rule and spin it around and use it for mobilization and solidarity. And so and I kind of agree with it. So the whole thing is, hey, if you have one drop of African blood in you and you identify as such, you African, you with us, we ain't care what complexion you fall on in that grade or even what percentage of your DNA say. If you culturally, and you, Dr. Curry often uses the term, you have the phenotypical and then you have the ontological. You understand? Right. And so the phenotypical is me. Of course, I'm phenotypically African. I got a flat nose. I'm very dark. My eyes are yellow and all of these different things. Phenotypically African, but we have many of us who are phenotypically African and ontologically European. Understand? And it doesn't necessarily mean that because you pronounce your E's and R's that makes you any less African or even socially conscious about certain issues. It's not about that, but it's just about your essence and and your actual values. That's what it's more about than that. And again, for us as people of African descent, we have to look at race for what it is, a social construct. However, still acknowledge the realities that it play for us. It don't mean it don't matter, because it definitely does matter.
Yeah, it matters. Yeah.
But
for people who are millennials and younger, it has on a day-to-day basis a less impact in terms of what they see than what somebody who would have been closer to the periods back then, what you spoke of already. So in time, things is going to all blend together as a good book. Tell us that we do.
And then even many even Europeans, it's, of course, when you look at historically, there is, of course, a heavy leaning towards European versus African. And it's still like that in many ways. However, you still have many Europeans who empathize with the cause, and I'm not talking about those that appropriate the cause, like the fellas you see leading the line.
I know what you mean.
What I mean, right? But you do have, people of European descent who genuinely, and I also know a handful of Bahamians who are quote unquote Conky Joe, and they rejecting that now, and they saying, look, man, I black too. I don't have a problem with it, and I'm sure you don't have a problem with it,
No, but as I said, we all come from the same place, so that's the way I look at it. Right? So as we wrap up, because I know I eat a couple more of your minutes than what that I know in a cell phone where you run out and you just drop, but still, how do we move forward in this new day to get this unified identity so that we know who we are as Bahamians and Africans in the Bahamas, and by its most global verbiage of the meaning of the word African or blacks in Bahamian.
Another thing we could do too is we need to talk to our elders, talk to our griots, that 90-year-old great grandmother, start talking to her. Unfortunately, many times their gaslight is more serious than ours as we move into this information age, and that's understandable, but you could still grasp things. I have a great auntie who still is talking nostalgic about the days of the UBP in Kid Island. They used to bring us so much ham and turkey and all of that. And I asked her the last time I saw her, they getting very old now. My Uncle Jeter just died. May he rest in peace. A few months ago. And but at the same time, I asked her bluntly, I guess it's the Shango in me because he's known for being blunt at times, but I was like, so I ain't gonna call the name of the family, but people know who it was, So where he is now, he's still around, they still there and there, but we had him, And even so, racism is very real in the Bahamas, and that's something that people don't want to acknowledge. It's very real, and you often hear Bahamians. It's almost like we don't want to deal with swallowing certain pills, and so when we get into these racial historical issues, you often hear, I get white in my family and all of that, and I usually ask them, well, how much of them show up to your family reunion? And usually the answer is none, right? So You know, yeah, you all made up the same blood, but that don't make you all family all the time, you know.
Yes.
But you know, and it's not about hating anybody, it's about telling the truth. Because only when we know this truth, then we can know what's wrong with us. Is, you know, if you view us as a human body, as a human, you know, we have this traumatic childhood. And we just trying to plow, going into adulthood now, trying to plow through adulthood, and we have the traumatic childhood that we're not even trying to acknowledge, you know? And so that's how you look at it, you know? And so we can always have shortcomings. We can always hold on to what we shouldn't hold on to and let go what we should be holding on to until we dive into these things. And as Bahamians start to, we will all find aspects of our history that we can be proud of, particularly when you see things connected to you or your island or your name, you know. As I'm sure you've experienced in studying the Dillit family, there's things that I sure made you cringe, but for the most part, I'm sure it's a history that you could be proud of, you know.
Yeah. Well, I need to put you in contact with some of my family members who are actually running all of the details, because they always get, you know, all fired up when they hear different things that people say about different things, and they'll say, well, don't go like that. And I said, but you all know this, but you're not telling nobody else.
Yeah, you need to tell.
So you need to tell somebody who could talk about it in a contractual way, and so maybe you might be somebody who could help them with it, and they could help you in your walks, and so forward. And so, and Leslie, yes, he is going to come back. Chris is going to come back. We have a special show that we want to do. On a special subject in particular, and so once he gets prepared in position to do that, then he's going to tell me to come back, and he's going to give me the show before he give it to anybody else. But you know, and so forth. So before we take our leave, Chris, the last question I have before I give you the opportunity to say anything you want to say to the public would be, is that what identity opportunity stands out the most that we could benefit today?
Oh, well, there's many things. Even on my first 2 trips to Ghana, with the networking that we did, what you start to realize is ways that you could connect with each other on every level. So, of course, we spoke mostly about genetically and historically and culturally. But there's also several economic ways, particularly in Ghana. Ghana is known as the gateway to Africa, and the home of Pan-Africanism as well, you know. And there's too many benefits that I could name, you know. For example, in Ghana, they have a surplus of tomatoes. You know, tomato is a big base for what we do here, you know. I'm not a guy who knows everything, and I would just encourage people to visit. Particularly even the rural areas like Porkasu, you know, where Junkanoo is from. From you go there and you tell them people, hey, I'm from the Bahamas, they know now, and then we made the connection, and they can treat you like a king, just like they treat me, you know. And it's just so much things in that area, just to reconnect with it. And when it just gives you, it's like I just been having good luck since then. You know what I mean? And it's because I have this proper view of myself. And it's something that you can't experience. And when you go, you know, you need to visit the forts. When I visited Fort Gross Friedrichsburg in Princesstown, aka Porkasu, you know, Robin Lightburn accompanied me as well, youth manager of the Red Cross, as well as my wife, Tamara Scavella. And we did the humanitarian, or I don't like that word, sorry, the outreach initiative as well. That's why this trip hasn't been so publicized, because we didn't want to have all these kids' pictures and all that there. So we're trying to do properly structured, with the proper permission and all that before we actually show people a part of the initiative. So it's not just research. I don't want to count my chickens before they hatch, but it's going very, very well. And as things manifest, I'm sure that the entire nation will be proud of our shared history with the people of Porkasu. People got to get to know this man, Your Augustine. He's sitting in the same throne as Junkanoo. Like, I don't think I need to say anything more about that. You know what Junkanoo is, who he was, right? Then you have Alex Kofi, you know, you have several guest houses in the area, and then you have the surrounding areas that are also linked to Jan Kwao, particularly Buswa, where he won some of his battles, you know. And so this is the stuff that I learned going there. You are immersed in it. When you see somebody who doing something that you all do, one of the people who was with us, you know, they say they're feeling a little down. And the fellas start talking in Twi, which is their indigenous language around there. And all I hear is fever grass. I say, hold on, what would you just say? Fever grass? I say, y'all are fever grass? Yeah, I say, yeah. And y'all just call it the same thing? He's like, yeah. It's like, what? Fever grass, you know? They got shepherd's needle. It was just amazing to see some of the similarities and just know, yeah, this is where we come from, you know? It's another thing that was so funny. The drivers in Ghana, we drive bad, Jamaicans drive horrible, and Ghanaians just in an entire category all by themselves. No disrespect to my brothers in Ghana. Boy, they drive crazy. But it was so funny because every time you almost get in a collision, which is common on almost every journey, they have this expression, they say, ish, right? And you know, we say itch, and itch is an expression that we use at that crucial moment of impact. And they do the same thing with this expression, ish. And I was just like making all these connections, and it's almost like you home. You know, and then when you return back, you see things differently. There are many people there. They are huge on manufacturing in Ghana. I can speak more so to Ghana because that's where I've spent time. And you could go there and you could see many opportunities. They literally giving people land who come in from this side. If you fed up, you know what I mean? If you want, go to Ghana. You know what I mean? They have a very, especially if you're an artist or you produce something like that. You know, they have a vibrant manufacturing culture over there. On the side of the road, people building furniture. On the side of the road, people making shoes. You know, they ain't no one begging. Even if they living on the street, they bring in homemade Q-tips to try to sell you. You know what I mean? And they just very proud. They have a saying in Ghana that the women own the land, but the men walk like they own the land. And that's because they do this bop, just like us, they walk with this bop, this confident bop. It's like, man, look at these fellas, man. You know, so it's honestly undescribable. It's something you have to experience when you're there. Of course, there's certain things, as in any country, that'll be a culture shock. You know, the police are pretty wild over there, I'll say that. You know, they pretty bold with their wildness. I'll just leave it at that, you know. They eat with their hands, you know, and my brother Sam Akpo, shout out to Sam Akpo too, you know, one day we were sitting down eating and they gave us forks to use because they knew we were foreigners, and he was trying to eat with the fork and he slammed the fork down. He's like, man, that's too hard to use. He just started eating with his hands, you know. So Ghana is the type of place where they don't even have the same hang-ups as us. Like, you will see two male friends, you know, and they'll just have their arm around each other. Gradually lay head on the boy, shoulder, and fall asleep. But they don't even have the same hang-ups as us. You know, what's nobody you like money, you know, and all these things. You know? So it's very interesting, you know what I mean? And you will see two fellas sharing a bowl of soup with their bare hands. You know, and I respect it, even though I wasn't partaking as much, but I respect it because I know that it was in defiance of this colonial mindset, you know. And they almost look at you sideways if you asking for a fork, so you better eat with your hands. And boy, if you think you know spicy food, you don't know spicy food till you go to Ghana, and they just watch you.
I'll have to put up a flag on my forehead or something like that. With my throat and everything, I can't deal with that.
And also, even to touch on the colorism issue that you spoke of, you know, skin bleaching is very common in Ghana, sadly. However, without the skin bleaching, you also see many, many, many different shades. You see someone who blue, black, purple, then you see someone who your complexion, you know what I mean? And so it's people always think of this phenotypical African as being very dark, high cheekbones, wide nose, slanted eyes, you know, but that's not it, you know, all over. And you see all the different diversity. Just in Western Ghana, in the Princestown area, they have like 6 different dialects and languages, you know. Wow. So and just to see Africans speaking like that in itself was fulfilling to me. You know, I don't mean to ramble on, but
but that's good, you know. But so is anything you want to say to the public before we go?
Just where to find me, and if you're interested in helping out with any of our initiatives, whether it's the research initiative or whether it's the outreach initiatives, where we focus on 5 schools in the area of Parkasoo. Shout out to, of course, to Youth Empowerment through Soccer International, the SI. Shout out to the Quality group of companies, more specifically QBC, right there in the Mall of Marathon. Shout out to them as well. You know, and there are several others. I don't want to go down that road right now.
Yeah.
Too many others. Dr. Cornell Collins, Attorney Andrew Roll. All of these have been people who have, and of course, let me stop before I get in trouble. The Junkanoo Commandos and Angelique McKay.
Yeah. We know,
all of these people. You know. So I am eternally grateful to them, and we are now moving full steam ahead. You could find me at Sankofa Flamingo on Facebook. That's the best way to reach me. Just send us a message on there. We're actually working on our website and all of these things. And the organization is about to grow so that we could help us fulfill our initiatives much better. And the ultimate goal actually is to make Nassau a sister town to Princess Town, and in tandem making both World UNESCO Heritage Sites. And then in tandem with that, building a heritage tourism product between the Bahamas, Junkanoo, elevating Junkanoo as a hero, not just for us, but the diaspora. This man was beaten up on the British and the Dutch, didn't get enslaved. His fate, actually, he was taken to Kumasi, where he founded another town called Quadaso, which meant calabash. And on his gold coins, he used to have a calabash on it. And a part of his mythos was he was so rich, when you come there asking for money, just take this big scoop and calabash and scoop you a bunch of gold and tell you go with that gold. Almost like a Ghanaian Mansa Musa, you know, almost like a real life T'Challa, if you will, from Black Panther, you know. So, yeah, it's a history we could be proud of, and you could reach me at Sankofa Flamingo, and that's where you could type it in online. It's on Google as well, and you will go right to it. We have
it on the screen for people.
Yeah, we have a lot of stuff coming out as well, and so you can follow us on there. Let us know which initiative you're looking to support, and we're also carrying over contingencies. The next trip will probably be in the next 3 months or so, but we're still planning for that, and it's going to be on not a huge scale, but a pretty bigger scale, you know, and there's a lot of initiatives there, but I don't want to share all online, because like I said, we're not that type of NGO, you know, where we go in and we take pictures and smile and photo ops and all that. So people will be able to see what we're doing, but if you want to get involved, you could message us right there, and we will definitely figure out how to get people involved in the way they want to,
Yes. Omo-Shango.
Yes, thank you.
I've
fun. Yeah, man.
I've had a ball here. I'm listening to all of this. So you give me plenty studying to do.
Oh yeah.
You know, because you know I'm one I can go back and listen to the tape and pick out words, and I gotta go research some of them words that you talk about, some of them people you talk about. That I might not have had exposure to before.
Yes,
and I hope the persons out there who've been listening to the show and who will listen to it in time, because we leave the shows up on Facebook and YouTube. You know, take them down so they can be an educational tool for teachers and the like who want to go and tap into them and play whatever portions of it for, like you mentioned, to their students and whoever and so forth, because that's our goal, is to just try to change the narrative here in the 242. We don't we just feel that's the only way life is going to change. If we change the way we think and the way we, then everything follows from there. So thank you kindly. Thank you all who've been out there on Facebook and YouTube, listening to us and listening to Chris in particular, because he had more to say than me. I only had a couple of words. But,
sorry, man.
That's good, man.
I can be long-winded, you know. Sometimes.
Yeah, but you know, you hit the points that I wanted you to get into, and so that's the key right there, right? We need to continue these type of narratives, people. Let's just not have these one-offs. We need to make it more of a continuous thing. And the more we talk about these things, the more people start to understand why people are saying what they're saying, versus just make it a one-off and then somebody complain, and then, you know, you just disappear and go forward. And I don't mean Chris just be a part of the thing. We can have these discussions on our own, right? And so forth. And so forth. So thank you, you all. Chris, thank you a lot.
Thank you for having me. Looking forward to coming back.
So we're going to arrange that. And for that special subject that we already talked about that we were going to do. And so what we like to encourage our listeners to do is to pause think about it with intentional thought and consider where we go from here. Don't forget to share this information. Ask your friends to like it. Like, even if you don't want to watch any more shows, still like the show, because somebody else is going to get connected to it, who's going to get connected to it, and then it might hit somebody who really going to benefit from it. We hope this has been of value to you and so forth. It surely has been a value to me, and from Chris's willingness to stay on beyond an hour seemed to be a value to him.
Yes,
So thank you, Chris. We thank our sponsors and all of those friends out there. And if you want to get involved with something to think about, we welcome anybody, the students and the like, who want to get exposure to broadcasting and different aspects of producing the show. We're here. We want to help people learn and be exposed to more things than just doctor, lawyer, accountant, traditional academic programs of sorts. So thank you kindly. Stay safe.
Okay.
Vaccinate and isolate if you don't vaccinate.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you all. Madam
Yes,
Producer, likewise to you. And you can take us home so I can eat some of that.